Sonal Verma, Chief India Economist with Nomura, Singapore. Sonal, good morning. Thank you for joining us. So, what should be the priority tomorrow? Stick to fiscal deficit. Don't miss on the headline number. I mean, government may use sounds, a lot of financial jugglery to make that number look good. But do you think it is imperative for government or the finance minister to stick to 3.3? That is the headline number.
Well, I think, the context is clearly that we have more or less with some hiccups seen 4 years of fiscal prudence. And the question is whether it's now a fork in the road, given elections, we move towards populism. The question is, can we balance the two? And our sense is that actually we might see the government balancing the two. So this year, unlike FY18, there aren't any one-off like GST, and therefore we do think that 3.3 is going to be met. But yes, the rural side of the economy does face a lot of pressure. I think the question to ask there is, do they need a one-time income transfer, or there is sort of a perennial or a perpetual income transfer scheme that needs to be set in place? There are clearly some longer-term issues that need to be resolved, but I don't think we've had enough time and discussion on these issues. So our sense is that the government might announce more a one-time, sort of a cash transfer to farmers. But the way to balance it out in terms of not slipping on the deficit target too much for FY20 would be perhaps via a bit more aggressive assumptions on the revenue side, sharing some of the costs with the states. Overall, I think, our sense is it's going to be more balanced in terms of not too much fiscal slip, I think, as the markets are fearing, but having some package for farmers. So on the whole, we think it's going to be sort of a populist talk, but a relatively more prudent walk in terms of the numbers.
Sonal, and that's the talk, right? That this time around, perhaps the government is not only going to try and please the rural India, but there would also be perhaps a bounty for MSMEs and even the middle class. What's your expectation there? What could be done here?
Well, when we talk about the middle class, we usually are talking about some sort of income tax, cuts, slab changes, rate changes, etc. But given this is an interim budget, significant amendments to the Income Tax Act are quite unlikely. So, barring the government giving out a vision of what it might do if it comes back to power for the middle class, we are not expecting any big tax changes, particularly addressing the middle class. Now, the MSME, I think, definitely is a segment that has faced multiple stress points, from demonetization to GST and then the NBFC liquidity issues. So there could be some sort of a support for this sector, but perhaps that could be in the form of some interest rate waiver or interest rate subvention, perhaps, for this sector. But like I said, not expecting any big tax changes for the middle income.
Sonal, I know you've addressed the question on fiscal deficit and how the government may walk the path of prudent fiscal management on that front, but let's go with the assumption that they miss the number by a few basis points. So 3.3 becomes 3.5, and they indicate, which is not really something that is set in stone, 3.1, 3.2 for the next year, because there's going to be a new government at the helm by then. How much of that would derail sentiment? How much of that would really make investors feel like, okay, they could have done better?
Well, I think, the focus is a lot more on what the government intends to do in FY20, because I think it's fairly clear that the pressures on the revenue side are quite significant for FY19. So even if they meet 3.3, or, the scenario that you're giving that they do not meet, we are getting to that essentially via a lot of, pending payments getting pushed out to next year. So the way we are achieving these targets itself is sort of questionable, and there are medium-term risks that are there. But I think we need to sort of look at this in the context of our macro policies in India generally becoming more expansionary. And are the macro policies in this particular case, fiscal policies, moving towards boosting consumption and taking money away from investment? So while there may be, disappointment or optimism, it really depends on, what the expectation is going into the budget. it does, the main thing that we are looking at is whether the composition of growth in India is going to move more towards consumption and away from investment, which is, I would say, the exact opposite of what we need at this point in time. So, like I said, one is, whether the government is able to balance the farm requirement with fiscal prudence, and second, what does it mean in terms of growth composition, because of course that has broader macro implications, on the twin deficits not only but also on the monetary policy side.
Can I safely say that, look, this year's budget is no different? There would be optimistic assumptions on the revenue front, and there would be pessimistic assumptions or low assumptions on the expenditure front. That's how they will make the numbers look good.
Well, given the extent of slip that we are potentially staring at, even in FY19, getting to this number, of course, means that a lot of payments are getting pushed out to FY20. So yes, your point is right. I think if the government does show significant, if it does show a consolidation for next year, for FY20, it has to be via fairly aggressive assumptions on the tax front, on the disinvestment front. One will also have to assess, how much spending they've budgeted on the farm package and some of the regular payments that they make. So, of course, we will be going through, how credible the numbers are. And in general, it does seem to us that the consolidation perhaps might be based on fairly aggressive revenue assumptions.
2 years ago, Finance Minister Jaitley gave a goalpost for where the corporate tax rate would settle, and he has to follow a glide path. He's reduced corporate tax rates after that. Do you think in this budget corporate tax rates have to go down? Otherwise, they will not achieve the glide path of 25%, what was indicated 2-3 years ago?
Well, we're definitely not expecting this. I think clearly, the glide paths have changed, not just for the corporate tax, but even for the fiscal, the glide paths have changed. And given the shortage on the GST front, which frankly, more than a year after GST implementation, one did not expect the extent of GST shortfall we are seeing right now. I think that really constrains the government in terms of giving too many fiscal tax, SOPs or reductions right now. So given the fiscal situation, which is fairly constrained, there's no space, and therefore, yes, there was a glide path given, but there isn't the space to actually execute it this time.
I know this may not be directly within the budget statement, but the data that's come out from the National Sample Survey Office, which looks at periodic labor force survey, has highlighted that unemployment in India has reached a 45-year high at 6.1%, with youth unemployment being much higher, and there being a case of severe joblessness in especially rural areas. What the government is doing is, of course, plugging the gaps and handing over money in the hands of people associated with the rural economy. But it's really at the core about bringing in productivity gains and creating more jobs. Can the budget address that issue?
I mean, I think the broader set of policies over the last 4.5 years, I think at least initially, the objective, of course, if you look at the thrust of policies since 2014, has been one on building, public infrastructure in various spaces, all sorts of logistics, transportation network, etc. And second, the entire Make in India, do not import, produce it domestically. Let's create domestic manufacturing facilities for defense or, railway locomotive or, be it electronics. The third, in terms of, the job creation in India cannot just be in the manufacturing sector. It has to be, but cannot solely be there. You need to also create more jobs in the services sector, and there's a certain level of skill training that the segment of the population requires. Even if you're trying to address the rural concerns on the farming side, one of the options is to get migration of workers outside of farming, which tends to see low productivity, into some of the non-farm activities, which requires creating opportunities there. So I think there's a whole set of things that needs to be done. In terms of government efforts, some of this, has been done and is work in progress in terms of, the public infrastructure. Some of the other things, a lot more needs to be done in terms of creating the manufacturing facilities or in terms of skill development, etc. So, it's clearly work in progress, and one thing that's become very clear is that the global growth environment is looking like it's going to slow down clearly in the next 12 months. So the challenge for us is also that we not only need to offset the global headwinds, but create enough domestic tailwinds to be able to create jobs. So it's a much bigger challenge. The budget, of course, is quite limited in terms of what it's going to do, but it's the broader thrust of policy that becomes a lot more important.
So at a time like this, Sonam, given all the parameters that we've discussed, where do you see the yield and the currency headed? Because there is a fresh concern on liquidity as well, especially with NBFCs.
So, as far as the budget is concerned, I think, there are clearly fears of a very populist budget. We do think it's not going to be extremely populist. Yes, a farm package, but a lot more balanced budget. So it could be slightly positive relative to expectations of huge populism. But there are two concerns that we do have beyond the budget. One is the growth outlook. We do still think that expectations that growth is going to be able to sustain above 7% in the 12 months to us looks very difficult given the global slowdown and the domestic political uncertainty, which is going to negatively impact investments. And second, linked to that, the political uncertainty itself, like I said, is going to have an impact. So the growth disappointment and the political uncertainty, to our mind, would mean higher risk premia for India, and that could weigh on the currency into the elections. But the growth outlook is positive from the bond yields perspective, because the RBI policy meet next week, while we don't think the MPC is going to change in terms of the policy rates, we do think they're going to change the stance back to neutral, and sometime post sometime in the third quarter calendar year, we do think that benign growth and inflation environment would set the stage for a rate cut in India. So we do think directionally that's going to be positive, but for now, of course, we need to navigate the headwinds that are there.
Truly enough. Sonal, great chatting with you as always. Thanks very much for taking out the time to be with us this morning.
Thank you.